Welcome back, everyone, to Open Line, talking about history, talking about the impact of gentrification on our historic buildings. We have with us Dr. Carole Bucy, Davidson County's historian, telling us stories about historic buildings. And Joyce called in and asked a couple of things, but the thing we wanted to get to was, what can average people do? We're seeing a lot of buildings that are endangered, historic buildings endangered. What can people do?
First of all, the most important thing, I think, for citizens to do is to be in constant communication with their Metro Council person. We have 35 district councilmen and 5 members and 5 council at large seats, and they need to hear from you about development in your own neighborhood, what is going on, and what needs to be done to slow some of this down. And they need to be very attentive not only to the council, but also to the Planning Commission, which has a lot of long-term oversight. And they do have a voice in things. You have a voice. Every one of us has a voice in what this city is becoming. And we have a responsibility, if we don't like the way things are, to make a suggestion as to how it can be done better or differently that will be more pleasing. So you have to be an active participant in our government and in all of the zoning decisions and things of that nature that are made.
There are 35 different Metro councilmen, 35 different districts, so they should be fairly responsive.
Yes,
there are a lot, and so reach out. All right, let's keep going down this list. Urban Renewal, the Capitol Hill project.
Okay.
So we have a picture of that. What's going on here? What's this about?
Well, after World War II, Harry Truman was president, and he wanted to do some things that would benefit cities, to stimulate the cities. And so Congress created this Urban Renewal program. Now, in theory, it sounded great. You're going to take out housing that is substandard, in many cases housing that doesn't even have indoor plumbing, and you're going to put nicer, modern buildings, generally office buildings or commercial buildings, but you are going to improve the landscape of your community. You're going to build better roads for people to get around in your city. And so as a result of this, Nashville became an urban renewal city, and there were several pockets of urban renewal going on here in Nashville, the city, because we hadn't created metropolitan government at this point going on. The first one, and one of the most far-reaching, was in fact the Capitol Hill program. And the idea was that this housing, which people did in fact refer to as slums, were surrounding the state capitol, and an eyesore to many people who thought our capital was so beautiful, too beautiful to be surrounded by what they considered substandard housing. So urban renewal came in, and yes, they did condemn the land, and a property owner could get paid for that land, but then if the property owner is renting that property to somebody, that person who is the renter has nowhere to go, and they're not benefiting from the financial transaction that helps the owner. And so they took out this, and they built James Robertson Parkway, which is a magnificent road to drive on. But when you think about the human cost of what it took. Right here we sit in the News Channel 5 studios on James Robertson Parkway, and you see that this was once part of this area that was redeveloped, and it goes all the way around down to the courthouse. So the price of this was higher than people in Nashville were willing to admit. Not the dollars and cents, but the human price, because this made many African American families without homes, excuse me, without places to live. They had to relocate under very difficult circumstances. Nashville also had a very strong business-oriented group of African American leaders. Fourth Avenue, for example, was a very prosperous African American commercial district. There were lawyers' offices on Fourth Avenue. There were all manner of things. The National Baptist Publishing Company was there at the edge of Fourth Avenue. And so all of that business district was pretty much destroyed by this barrier, if you will call it that, meaning Briley Parkway was built around the Capitol in a great wide swath.
I think the next picture might show some of that. Is that right? If we go to the next picture, I think it shows some of that African-American business commercial area. And you're saying much of that was destroyed? Pretty
much all of it. The Morris Memorial Building, the National Baptist Publishing House, was about the only one that wasn't destroyed. But there was an African-American movie theater down there, the Bijou. There were all sorts of businesses. There were professional offices down there in that area. And keep in mind, African Americans had no other places to shop and eat and go to the movie. If they went to any of the 4 luxurious movie theaters on Church Street, they had to sit in the balcony. They could not eat in any Nashville restaurants. And if they went into a store, they could buy clothing, but they couldn't try it on. And it doesn't, just things that children think about that adults never think about, is the African Americans couldn't use the restroom. So if you've got a child who's, I gotta go, you had to take your child out into an alley to take care of bodily functions, because they had no restrooms in many of the buildings where they were allowed to buy things.
What year is that picture, do you think, approximately?
That picture was early 1950s.
Early. And now I think the next picture, is that the
I think it's
Bijou
the Bijou Theater. I think it's the Bijou Theater.
And what is that the theater you were talking about?
There were 2 very fine African American theaters here. The Bijou was one and had very long historic roots, and the Ritz was over on Jefferson Street, very near Fisk.
Very interesting. The next picture says Capitol Hill Urban Renewal Efforts, and
yes,
that's what you're talking about. Is that the final product?
I think that's the map. Yes, you can see that circular semicircle there around the state capitol, and the state capitol is right in that. And so it was what they referred to as slum removal, but African Americans rightly saw it as African American removal, because they were pushed out of an area where they had historically lived.
We have a call here. Let's go to David. Hello, David.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to piggyback on what she said about what the public can do, what the common person can do.
Okay, you want me to...
One thing I've noticed is, of all the districts that we have, most of our council members were not born here. They didn't grow up here, and much of this, they don't really comprehend it, and they don't realize that it is something that is very, very important, because they weren't born here, they weren't grown up here.
All right, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk. So you said, in response to what can people do, you said contact your council member. He's saying, well, he doesn't know how much that helps.
I think you've got to get involved in the government. And yes, the council people, some of them were not born here. Some were born in other places. We've had lots of mayors who were not born here either. But that doesn't mean they don't have empathy with saving the city. Just because they were born in another state or another town doesn't necessarily mean that they can't have an interest in preserving our history here. And so they've got to hear from you. They've got to hear from all of the silent people who are complaining and honking their horns when they're in traffic that they think is too thick. They need to make contact with their representatives. When metro government was created, the consolidation of the city and the county, it wasn't one taking over the other, it was bringing two governments into one government. They deliberately made the council large to present citizens access to government, and that has been very effective. They also created a large number of boards and commissions in the charter that was approved by the voters in 1962 before Metro went into effect in 1963. That charter had all of these boards and commissions attached to various agencies of metropolitan Nashville-Davidson County government, and that was citizen involvement in decision makings. And Nashville has a host of boards and commissions that the members of which have direct involvement in things like planning, all manner of things related to the city.
All right, David, thank you for your call. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and look at some more pictures, talk about some more of all of this. Very interesting. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.